Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys for joining. We are doing a HESA HES Office Spotlight event. We have the Accessibility Services Office here today. Aviva and Rachel will be sharing with us about how to access the services and what kind of services are available through the Accessibility Services Office.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited. We've got some quick slides, but don't worry, there's plenty of time for questions at the end, and we'll share our contact information a couple of times as well. So questions can always be sent after the fact for privacy reasons, or you can use the chat function, anything like that, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. So we're just going to quickly start with kind of giving a quick overview of everyone on our team. So our director, Leora Simon, we have another assistant director, Megan O'Brien, and our digital accessibility and assistive technology specialist, Julia Herosian. My name is Aviva Hollander. I am the coordinator for accessibility services. And I've got our amazing other assistant director, Rachel. I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Aviva. I am one of our assistant directors, as Aviva mentioned, specifically for the Harvard Summer School I take point on, although I do meet with students all year long. My colleague Megan and I both meet with students to hear academic and residential accommodation requests and make reasonable determinations based on that information and documentation, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on.
Awesome. So we just really wanted to quickly set up this presentation and kind of our agenda. It's a very simple agenda. We are going to go over what our office looks like. We have some slides, like I mentioned. We're really happy you took time out of your busy day to spend just a few minutes with us to learn some more about resources at DCE and at the Extension School. Like I mentioned, there will be plenty of times for questions. Accommodations, disabilities can, for some people, be really private, and that is totally okay, and our office supports that. So any questions, you can always email us. We have our phone number at the end of the slide as well. So let's get started, shall we? So we just briefly wanted to give you guys our office's mission, and I'm just going to read directly off the slide. So we strive to provide an equal opportunity for qualified students with disabilities to participate in, contribute to, and benefit from all aspects of their academic programs in the Division of Continuing Education through the provision of reasonable accommodations, modifications, axolotl aids, and services and academic adjustments. So, Rachel?
Yeah, so I think we would be remiss not to mention the fact that we operate under specific federal civil rights laws. These laws include the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Without getting too much into the weeds of the law, I can say that Section 504, which was passed in 1973, is sort of the foundation of our work in disability services. It applies specifically to any program receiving federal financial assistance. And since most colleges receive that type of funding, they must comply with that law. It protects individuals with disabilities who are otherwise qualified to participate in a specific program from being discriminated against due to their disability. And it requires colleges and universities to implement accommodating measures when a student may not have equal access due to their disability. Next slide, please, Aviva. And the Americans with Disabilities Act was built upon Section 504 and extended these protections to all areas of public life. So our office works within the context of these laws to meet student needs in a reasonable and equitable way. We can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So that leads us to ask, what is a disability, right? Like, how do we define that? So the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended defines a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. This actually includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they don't currently have a disability. And it also includes individuals who do not have a disability but are regarded as having a disability. And we just listed a couple of quick things to keep in mind when you're thinking about disability. So many disabilities are invisible, right? You know, so many people are dealing with psychological issues or learning disabilities, and those things aren't going to be glaringly obvious when you meet a person or see a person. So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. If you're not sure if you qualify or if you should request accommodations, please, we are like an open book. Come call us, email us, ask those questions. We're here for that reason, and we're happy to guide you through the process. And then finally, you know, some people who do technically have a disability don't identify as being disabled or having a disability. So just another important thing to keep in mind when interacting with others. We just have a couple of quick statistics that really demonstrate how widespread disability really is. So this one kind of shows you the fact that 1 in 4 adults in the United States are dealing with some type of disability. And then on our next slide, I'm sure this number has risen since we created this slide, but when we did, kind of like an alarming amount of people, 1,242,000 and about 140 people in Massachusetts actually have a disability.
So now that Rachel did a really great job setting up what's the foundation of our office's work, we're going to talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty process of requesting accommodations. I promise it's not that scary. Our accommodation process is built to be fully online. There is nothing about being on campus or anything that requires it. We did include a QR code that can be scanned on the slides. If you just look up ASO, which is our little acronym. We love to shorten things at Harvard. Every office seems to have an acronym. If you look up ASO, our office will come up, or if you just look up accessibility or accessibility services, will pop up on any of the extension school websites or the summer school website as well. And you can always look through the information there, but I'm just going to briefly go over what the process looks like. So the first step is you just log into your MyDCE. It's all in one place. Your MyDCE will take you to another screen where you'll click Continue to Accessibility Services Access Portal, or our office likes to call it ASAP to shorten things once again. And you'll click Register, and you'll register as a new student. You will fill out a quick form. It asks a couple of questions like what accommodations you're seeking, what are your diagnoses, and then you'll need to upload documentation with your form. Documentation can sometimes be difficult to obtain or not knowing where to start, and our office also has resources for that. We have guidelines we can send students to give you or your provider a better idea of what information we need. And we also have a provider verification form that students can just hand to your doctor, and you can say, are you willing to fill this out for me for accommodations? And it kind of gives them that guideline. So once that information is submitted to our office and it's uploaded into our system, if everything looks all good and we don't need any further information from you, you will receive an email letting you know to schedule what's called a welcome meeting, or what could be considered like an intake meeting. It's all done online. Rachel does them, Megan does them. Our director does occasional ones for temporary accommodations as well. So you'll meet with someone over Zoom and talk about the accommodations you're requesting, and from there, they will make those determinations. So let me go to the next step. So like I mentioned, Rachel and Megan do a really great job. All accommodations are done on a case-to-case basis. And I think it's important to emphasize that 2 people could have the exact same diagnosis and need very different accommodations because maybe their disability affects them differently, or where they need that extra accommodation or support could be different. So everything is determined on a case-to-case basis. Once a student is approved for those accommodations, as long as they're not temporary, right? Once they're approved for those accommodations, they stay with you the entire time you are taking classes with us. Our office, once a student is approved and registered in classes, will send your professor what's called an accommodation letter. And all it tells them is what accommodations you're approved for. It does not tell them why you're receiving them. It doesn't give them information like the diagnosis. It only tells them what you've been approved for so that they can make sure they're implemented in class accordingly. Every semester, a student takes classes. They just submit a semester request. You don't have to go through the process again. It takes 5 minutes online or less to submit a semester request, And like I said, those accommodations will stay with you and you don't need to worry about recontacting. Some students like to be in contact with our office. Once you've requested accommodations, if for some reason something else comes up and you need additional accommodations, you can always come back to our office and request additional accommodations at a later time. So it can be a continuous relationship. Some students, there is that continuous conversation throughout the semester. For other students, it's more they've got approved for what they need and they are good to go and our office doesn't hear from them as much. So whatever fits the student's style best for their learning and their accommodations, our office does our best to match that and accommodate those. Prefer Rachel?
So what do you need to know? So we wanted to just kind of highlight a couple of important things. Even though Aviva just did a wonderful job explaining everything, just some other notes. So all accommodation requests must be initiated by the student themselves, which means disclosing your disability to the Accessibility Services Office, right? We don't know that something exists for a student until they come forward and tell us that. An important part of our decision-making process in determining reasonable accommodations is to review pertinent medical documentation. Aviva kind of went into detail on what that documentation should look like, but really it can be anything from a full formal neuropsychological evaluation to something more simple, like a doctor's note, which is dated and signed by your physician. Really, it depends. So the best thing to do if you're not sure what to submit is to schedule an informational session with someone from our office, or even just give us a quick phone call. And Aviva's really great at walking students through that. Refrain from submitting medical documentation directly to their instructors. Our office is here for that reason. We're here to serve as that liaison between student and professor and help navigate those conversations. And that really helps to avoid bias and make the decision-making process. Like we take out the decision-making process for the faculty to protect both the student and the faculty throughout the accommodation process. Next slide, please. I think this is you, Aviva.
Yes. So how to use your accommodations. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth. It is important to emphasize accommodations are not retroactive. On occasion, there's always exceptions to some rules, but I would say like 95% of the time, accommodations are not retroactive. They cannot go backwards. So if a student took a test, ran out of time, and realized they didn't request extended time and now they need extended time, we can't let them retake a test with the time, if that makes sense. So it's important to do it in advance. We always encourage students to request accommodations before the semester starts, just to take that weight off them. They can make sure it's all set before classes start and that they'll have the accommodations on the first day of classes. Although students can request accommodations at any time during the semester, it is important to keep in mind when you're thinking of timeline, like if exams are coming up or a project or something in class that is causing stress or whatever it may be, that the accommodation process can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, especially during our busier times of year, which normally tends to be right around exam season. Our office proctors a lot and things like that. It can take 2 to 3 weeks. Some accommodations require third-party vendors, like for note-taking or other things like that. We'll get into a little bit more, but it's important to keep timeline in mind. We cannot approve accommodations for a quiz on Monday. We can't approve it if you're reaching out even the week before. Sometimes we can't do it that fast. So just keep in mind what's coming up and try to request accommodations as soon as you know you're going to need them. If you do not utilize an accommodation if you do utilize an accommodation and something about it is not being implemented properly, we want to know about it. Sometimes, extended time won't be added correctly on an online quiz. Exit out of the quiz. Don't take it. If you know your time's meant to be there, contact our office. We can add the time so that you can take the quiz with extended time, or reach out to the faculty and see what went wrong. Sometimes Canvas glitches and it's just not out of our control. But we want to hear about it. If something's not going right with the accommodation, we want to have that open dialogue with our students. There are temporary accommodations and adjustments that can be made for some conditions, like a concussion where you can't be looking at a screen, or we've had students who break their arm and they can't take notes in class for 6 weeks. Those would be some temporary conditions, what are considered temporary conditions that could get approved for accommodations. And there are some others that might not qualify for accommodations, but it never hurts to ask and reach out and get that information in case maybe it would be beneficial. So we also wanted to share some other information. We are not the only disability or accessibility office at Harvard. We have a central Harvard disability office called University Disability Resources, or UDR. You can find a ton of amazing information from them about opportunities on campus and other resources that exist for all Harvard students, regardless of affiliation. We also know that sometimes students are taking classes at other schools, and those other schools might have a different version of us. So for the Harvard College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, there is a different office, the Disability Access Office. Our office does work really closely with them. They're truly amazing, but they would be someone else. So it's important to keep in mind where's the class taking place so that you make sure you're in touch with the right people.
Okay, so here we have listed just some of the umbrellas which specific accommodations may fall under. This list is certainly not exhaustive, but it gives you a sense of how we narrow down specific needs. Just quick note, like so many times in a welcome meeting, I'm asked the question, well, what accommodations are available to me, like in general? And I really challenge students to sort of reframe their thinking in that instance to the opposite perspective, right? We want to identify what the needs are first. So, what areas of your academics are particularly challenging for you? And then from there, we can use our professional judgment to determine, are there accommodations that target those needs, that target those barriers to access? But here are just some examples. Note-taking being one of them, timed assessments, so like in-class assessments that have that strict time component, closed captioning or ASL interpreting. We get residential requests, and sometimes students make requests related to public speaking or, us making altercations or considerations when there is an oral presentation requirement in a class. So yeah, certainly not exhaustive, but those are just some of the areas that we accommodate.
So I know for a lot of people, if you're currently in a class, you might have just almost completed midterms a couple weeks ago, and it feels like final exams are coming up faster than expected. So we just wanted to give a brief example of one of the most, I would consider most commonly or widely used or requested accommodation, which is extended time. Extended time can look different for every student. Some students, it's 25% extended time, 50% extended time, 75% extended time, or 100% extended time, which is how our office breaks it down. It allows students to have more time on any timed assessment that's shorter than 6 hours. So if your professor has an assignment and you have 24 hours to complete it and turn it back in, extended time wouldn't apply to that because you have 24 hours. So anything shorter than 6 hours, it can apply to. We just had a brief example because I know extended time sometimes like figuring out the math of it can be a little confusing with wording. So an example of this is if a student is approved for 50% extended time, the professor gives the entire class 2 hours to complete the midterm. The student with extended time would have 3 hours. Because the original time is 2 hours, they get 50% extra, which would be 1 hour. So they get 3 hours to complete it. Some students have asked me if they have to use all of the extended time, or if they don't use it, do they lose it next time? No, it is there as anything you need it to be. It's sometimes a buffer to lower anxiety. Sometimes it's because things, it takes longer for a student to read or get through questions. There's so many different reasons why extended time would be the correct accommodation. So just because you don't use it does not mean you lose it. And if for some reason you're like, I have a ton more time, do I need to sit here and complete the exam? No, once you're done, and you can time out of the exam. Make sure you submit it and save it, but is not something that can just disappear because you don't end up utilizing all the time given. So we also just wanted to go over some other types of accommodations that apply to exams specifically, since this is kind of where everyone's brain's at this time of year. These are just some examples. There are other ones, and some of these don't apply to students, and some of them do. So some students have accommodations for breaks. So that's 15 minutes break for every 60-minute of exam time. And that can look different, whether it's an in-person or online exam, but I won't go into that much detail for the purpose of this presentation. Some students have an accommodation for a computer for exams with an essay component for handwriting or other reasons. A lot of students have reduced distraction testing environment for in-person exams. Exams converted into an accessible electronic format, which our amazing Julia does, or to have access to medication or food during exams as well. So these are just some of the examples. There's multiple reasons why different students would request, but we just wanted to give kind of a brief overview. And that is the end of our presentation. I'm going to leave this slide up. The next slide just says time for questions. But if you want to take a screenshot, you can always look us up. Like I said, on the website, it's pretty accessible to find our phone number pretty quickly. I think you can just Google it and our phone number will come up. And our email is accessibility@extension.harvard.edu. It's the same email year round, so it works for the extension school and summer school. And most likely, if you call us, I will be the one speaking to you. So we're happy to answer any questions students have. I think, Lindsay, you said you have some prepared, which is awesome. But thank you for listening to us, and we're ready for the questions whenever you are.
Sounds good. And if so, I just have a list of questions I collected in advance. But if anybody here has some additional questions that you feel comfortable asking, feel free to raise your hand and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat. So I've been checking them off as we go because you guys answered a lot of them already. So thank you for that. One of the questions is, what diagnoses qualify for accommodations? Like just some examples. I know you went over a lot of them. What are some that maybe you didn't mention that would qualify?
Yeah, well, I can answer this if you want, Aviva. I think it would definitely be difficult to mention every diagnosis that would qualify. However, how we never want to like group diagnoses either, but there are some sort of general categories that we can place specific diagnoses into. I think I briefly mentioned it during the presentation, but in addition to like physical or mobility diagnoses, there are sensory impairments such as visually impaired students or hearing impaired students. There are more invisible diagnoses like psychological diagnoses, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder is very common in the world today, unfortunately, autism spectrum disorder. Those are, I don't want to kind of pigeonhole because there are just so many different ones. I would encourage anybody who has more specific questions about that to schedule an info session where we can kind of talk more, one-on-one and like sort of in a more, I guess, like intimate environment rather than having to generalize about diagnoses.
Thank you. I actually thought of a specific one since I'm dealing with it now. Do migraines qualify?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, migraines definitely qualify. That they're a debilitating condition. Absolutely. Feel fortunate that I don't experience them myself, but I've met with many students who do. So yeah, absolutely.
Nice. And you already covered this, so I'm going to check this off too. Okay, one question that came up is, what happens if a professor refuses to grant an accommodation? I've never heard of it happening, and it seems like it would be unlikely, but maybe it does. Maybe you guys are both like, oh yeah, so maybe it's happened.
No, I think we're nodding because unfortunately we've heard a lot of stories of that happening for students at other institutions. I'm not going to say it never happens here, but part of the amazing thing about our office is that we will help students advocate for their accommodations. Some schools have a format where you get approved and they give you a letter and you have to physically like hand that letter to the faculty yourselves and advocate for it. Or sometimes there's even schools where like the professor can say no. That is not how our school functions. If a professor truly has concerns about an accommodation, our office will meet with them and explain to them why that accommodation is beneficial, or why it's needed while still keeping the student's private diagnosis or private information private, and try to figure out what the actual concern of the professor is. Or sometimes accommodations won't apply to a class and we don't know that until we hear from the professor. So we always would encourage the student to come to us, tell us what's going on, and we can communicate with the student and the faculty to figure out a solution to make sure that the student is still receiving the accommodations that they've been approved for.
Sounds good. Another question that came up is, are there course substitutions or waivers available? And one specific thing that someone asked about is like for math.
Yeah.
It seems to be one that people like to find a reason to do something else instead for.
Yeah. No, I have had that come up, Lindsay. That's a good point. And I've also had students request a foreign language waiver. We know students who have language processing disorders, that can be incredibly difficult because it can be difficult to decipher our own language, never mind a foreign language. And what I can tell you is it's the same. When a request like that comes up, it's the same process as any other requests where we have to have documentation that demonstrates a barrier to access is the language that we use. So if there is a true barrier, we consider it. I'm not going to say that we've never supported that type of thing. It is rare because those things are considered to be fundamental components of programs. And so whenever we're considering making a change to a fundamental component of a course or a program, we have to weigh in actually like the opinions of others too. There's a committee that makes determinations on what is considered fundamental. And so accommodations can't change that, but we've been creative in the past. We've worked with students in a number of ways to meet their needs when it comes to that. So there's not really a cut and dry answer there, but I won't say it's never happened.
Sure. Do you have an example of one like creative solution that you guys have come up with?
Instead of like doing a waiver. Yeah. So I know there are certain like as far as the foreign, I actually haven't dealt with the math waiver request before, but the foreign language, there are actually alternate types of foreign language classes that you can sometimes transfer the credits in. So they're a little less intensive than the ones that Harvard offers. Now, I don't want to advertise that widely because that's like a very rare exception that we allow for that, but that's something that we've done instead of completely waiving that foreign language requirement.
Sure. Another question was, is tutoring available? And then a part two to that is, are tutors trained in special education?
That is a really interesting question. There are some tutoring available, not through our office. Our office are not tutors, and we do make that clear. We're also not academic advisors. There are amazing academic advisors and tutors. There is a writing center at the Extension School, and I believe there's also some math tutors, although I think that might have some more strict guidelines and policies about when you can access it and things like that. I don't know fully knowledge because it's not a part of our office. Because our office isn't involved, those offices are totally independent in the way they function. I think if there was a concern about needing a specific type of help, our office would do our best to find the correct resources. But tutoring is not a part of our office, so we would direct the student to the correct offices where they could ask those types of questions.
And
Sure.
just to add one more thing, sorry to cut both of you off, is that such a wonderful resource that is like so kind of like simple, but something students just don't even think to do is to ask your teaching assistants those types of questions. Like, did they know anyone who offers tutoring service? Did they offer it themselves? What can they offer in their section meetings? Because we are limited in that type of resource. We consider it to be more of a personal service than an accommodation. So we wish that we had the bandwidth to be able to provide that type of service to students. But that's why I always say first step is like go to your teaching. If the class has teaching assistants, I know all the teaching assistants at Harvard are like so helpful and wonderful. So that's usually my advice there.
Sounds good. I didn't know that was an option, so that's helpful. The next question that came up was, are there support groups or clubs for students with disabilities?
I would ask your fellow students about that. I've heard there are. I think one of the wonderful things about that type of thing is we would be removed from that so that it's the people actually sharing and experiencing disabilities. So I believe there are, but I don't know.
There are some amazing clubs and resources. I would recommend if you're interested in getting involved and wanting that community to reach out to Harvard's Disability Resource Office, UDR. They will have a lot of information about student clubs. I do know they exist. I don't know the exact names off the top of my head, but reach out to UDR and they will be able to provide a ton of information about different opportunities to connect with other peers and students. And I believe there is a disability committee of some type through UDR, but it wouldn't be directly through our office. You would have to go to UDR for more information.
Yeah, and I know that we have a chat within the HESA WhatsApp community. We have a chat for students with disabilities, and people do ask questions in there sometimes, but we don't have any formal meetings or anything. Maybe if there's demand for it, we need to start something up there. And then this is actually the last one that I have on the list here. Somebody asked, are there scholarships specifically for students with disabilities? And I think that's probably kind of outside the scope of what you guys do, but maybe if you have any information you could share.
There are no scholarships through our office specifically. I know there are scholarships for people with disabilities that exist in the world, but nothing that you would directly get through our office. Students can always talk to the financial services office at DCE about scholarships or financial aid that they'll be able to provide that information. Or sometimes your best buddy is just to Google different scholarships that you could apply to. But yeah, there's currently nothing through our office directly about scholarships.
Yeah, and I think we want to check to make sure too how it would be applied just outside of this. I've heard that it'll displace your other funding, so that would be a thing to look into.
Yeah, that would be someone to ask someone who works in financial services
Financial services
or ask
office,
the
yeah.
people who have our office would probably have very little to no information about that, but we would be happy to direct them to the correct people to ask.
Yeah. Thank you. And I have not seen any questions in the chat, so I don't know if there's any final things that you guys would like to share.
Thank you for spending time with us. Like I said, please contact us if you have any questions. It never hurts to ask. I'm always happy to answer emails. I do my best. I feel like my response time is pretty good for the most part. So if anything ever comes up and you're just not sure whether our office would be the correct resource, we're more than happy to direct you or make sure you get to the correct resource, even if we're not. So please feel free to contact us. I did put the email address, like I said, accessibility@extension.harvard.edu, and our phone number, which is 617-998-9640. And most of the time, you'll probably get me first, but you might also talk to someone else from our team. And we're always happy to answer questions or concerns you have about requesting accommodations.